Why do we remember things in threes? Why do we say good, better, best, past, present, future, beginning, middle, end? So if threes are so fundamental to how we think, how we remember things, and how we make decisions, why do most professional services firms offer only one option to their clients? Let's talk about it today on Breaking BizDev.
You're listening to Breaking BizDev with John Tyreman and Mark Wainwright. Conversations that break down, beat up, and redefine business development for the professional services firms of tomorrow. And now for your hosts, John and Mark.
Welcome, everybody, to Breaking BizDev, the podcast that beats up, breaks down, and redefines business development for the professional services firms of tomorrow. I'm John, he's Mark, and today, Mark, we're going to talk about the rule of threes.
Yeah, that and a few other things as well. Hi, John. I'm excited to talk about threes. Just excited to talk about pricing today. How about you?
Yeah, I'm good. This is going to be the first of a two-part episode series where we're going to talk about the power of three and what the problem is facing these professional services firms. And then the second episode is really going to be a little bit more of a deep dive into some of the more tactical elements of putting together these different pricing options that we're going to talk about in today's episode. But Mark, what's the importance of the number three? Let's start there.
It's such a big deal. And longtime listeners, by the way, thanks for being here. Thanks for hanging with John and I today. We've touched on this in the past, but over time, I have realized this is such a critical conversation to have, such an important topic in professional services firms. And I have been working with firms for a while who have been implementing this and been doing it successfully and maybe a little bit unsuccessfully. So I thought we'd come back and get into it again. But yeah, the power of threes, right? I think it's this thing we know about. I think that some of us maybe have mostly subconsciously, we sort of embrace it. But it is known research, right? I don't have it at my fingertips, John. I know it's out there. There's a ton of research that says that we can process and remember information more easily when it's in groups of three. And so that's a huge deal here. The other important thing about threes provides contrast and comparison and lets us clarify between different options. That is the smallest number, three, that lets us get this comparison thing happening. You think there's two, sure. But three actually gives you that greater context. Three actually gives you the lowest and the highest, and then obviously offers something in the middle, right?
Yeah, the way that I see it is it also relates to everyday life a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. Like we talked about this in an episode we did about monthly recurring revenue, where in your life, you look at things on a monthly basis, right? If you go to McDonald's and like small, medium, and large, right? We're faced every day with these decisions about three different options that we get to choose from. So it's familiar to us too, I think.
Yeah, and I mentioned there Goldilocks, right? I don't know how common that story is nowadays, John, but I know it was ever present when I was young.
I tell it to my kids, sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Goldilocks and the Three Bears. She had the lower one that was too cold. She had the third option, the hot porch, that was too hot, right? And then she would settle on the one that was in the middle, and the beds, and that was built in pretty early on. And lo and behold, it doesn't just appear in coffee shops and children's fables. It's all over the place in the world. I've spent a lot of time, as folks know, in the world of architecture, and the built environment is filled with threes. Threes can create balance and harmony in design. Three doors or three windows or three whatever peaks, whatever. It's a little more harmonic than maybe just one or four or two. Three has a power there. In engineering, if you're building a structure, it's the minimal amount of supports or legs that you need in order to create a stable structure. Heck, even in like photography, when you're capturing images, right? There's the rule of thirds, and even your screen will get broken up into 9 boxes. So you're centering the main focus either a third of the way down or a third or 2/3 of the way up and a third on the left or a third on the right or
Oh,
however
I do it all the
however
time
else.
in video framing with video
Totally.
podcasts. This is moving a little bit beyond the rule of three, but this is more into the whole concept of giving our prospects options to choose from. And so there's a lot of cognitive biases at play here. I think one I like to call the autonomy bias. And so this is where buyers feel like they're in control and empowered to make a decision. And because of that, they're more likely to be confident in the decision that they make and take an action. So there's a lot going on there, like from like a psychology perspective, but just by
Sure.
giving buyers an option, it introduces a whole new game.
Yeah, and I've said this in the past that actually what we're really doing when we're selling our services or whatever else is that we're facilitating decision making on behalf of the client, right? We're helping them make a good decision, right? This isn't all about us. This is helping them navigate oftentimes a tricky, confusing buying situation. So we are giving them choice, giving them autonomy, helping them frame information and frame choices in a way that reduces decision fatigue. In three options does not make decision making harder, actually facilitates better decision making. Giving someone one option, you would think, oh, that's the simplest solution here, but it's actually not, because our brains start to lock up, because our brains start to say, shoot, what if
Binary.
this? What if that? What's the low end? What's the high end? Am I paying too much? Three feels complete, right? When we're giving options, it's not overwhelming. So we're facilitating this good decision making by presenting them a buying opportunity that feels complete and helps them be confident.
It adds context to the conversation. I think that's the
Yep.
big piece. And the difference, and it's a reframe from win or lose. These are the possible directions that we could go to help you solve your challenge, depending on how you want to approach it. And so I think that's like the big reframe here for people that are listening is it changes it from a zero sum game to something completely different.
Yeah, true. So we're going to stay kind of a little bit higher level in this conversation. Like we mentioned, we've got a part two that gets into some of the nitty gritty on this, because I think a lot of folks that I know and I work with want to get into the nitty gritty right away. They're like, oh, Mark, just send me a template. Show me how to do it.
Even outlining these two episodes, we started with the nitty gritty and you had to pump the brakes and say, hey, John, okay, pull back. Let's start like at the high level and then we can zoom in.
Yeah. And who knows, somebody may just skip over this one and be like, I just want to go to the nitty gritty. But this initial stuff is super important. It sets the stage for a successful rethinking on how people price. One of the things that I say, and I'll probably say this again this episode, I say it quite often, and frankly, I don't own this. Someone has said this in the past. I can't recall who it was, but I think it's a fantastic way to reframe all of this. And it's, we want our prospective clients to figure out how they want to work with us, not if they want to work with us.
That's right.
That is critical in all of this. And when we put forward three well-sorted options, they start to navigate those and figure out how they're going to make this work.
I got to tell you, Mark, I started implementing these like 3 option tables when we first started talking about this. And I got to tell you, it's changed my approach and my view on business development. And it's opened my mind a little bit. I'm not saying that I'm doing it perfectly by all means. I'm learning all the time,
Yeah.
even like preparing for this episode, but it is really helpful. And you see the wheels turning and your counterparts, and you kind of see that going on, and it's beneficial to them because they're in control.
Okay, we've got a couple caveats on this. We're going to keep on this power of threes, the power of the triumvirates. We're going to keep hammering on this, but there's a few clarifications and caveats in this whole conversation. And this is the first one here, because I know there's some listeners out here that are saying, I'm already offering options, Mark and John. You guys don't need to belabor this. I already offer my clients options. But I'm going to tell you, listener, dear listener, our friends, you're doing it wrong. Because what you're doing is you're offering a single price with a la carte options. And here's the rub. A la carte pricing on the surface, it looks flexible. It looks like, yeah, we could add this, we could add that. Sure. But it actually ends up creating confusion. by offering these individual add-ons, these individual a la carte elements on top of a single price, you create dozens, heck, maybe more, of possible permutations
Yeah, that's
on
true.
the ultimate price and start to force clients to assemble the solution on their own when they don't even fully understand it,
Yeah.
right? They're trying to get their head wrapped around all this. Professional services, we've said this, John, this is complex stuff. They're trying to get their head wrapped around that. And all of a sudden you start throwing all these options and they say, you pick, and they've got dozens of permutations and they get confused.
Well, yeah, now they're in the position of trying to understand how the sausage is made at the same time of making a buying decision.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good
So
point.
conversely, 3 distinct options simplify the whole process. Maybe you take your a la carte options and start bundling them together into 3 groups, start moving those into 3 discrete options with clear outcomes that are easier for the clients to understand. And then they're able to make an easier choice with more confidence. Right. That's a huge part of it. It just, a la carte falls short. It turns the whole process into a checklist where they start checking stuff they want or checking stuff they don't want.
Yeah, I've heard this called the Chinese menu, and
Yeah.
I've used it a few times early in my career, not to any success. And the whole concept was we're going to empower buyers with this and they can self-select and be involved in the process. But
It actually can backfire because once
yeah,
someone gets confused and they're overwhelmed, they will default back to something. And typically they will default back to the very lowest option. So all of these additional options that you thought actually added some value and were actually better decisions for them to make, they don't, because they get confused and they just default back to this baseline. You put someone through this terrible process of a la carte, they sign off on the cheap one, but lo and behold, that's 6 months down the road, 12 months down the road, whatever else, they're going to need other stuff. There's going to be other things coming. So you start having to come up with these additional service requests, or your margin blows up because you're trying to over deliver based on this super small scope that they picked initially. So things just turn upside down. So it's terrible.
yeah, I could see how those small projects could snowball out of control. All right, so we've kind of teed it up with 3s are familiar. There's a lot of power and psychology behind the rule of 3.
Yep.
A la carte options don't work. Why don't more professional services firms adopt the 3-option pricing model?
Yeah. One of the things that comes to mind is that it makes things a little bit more labor intensive at the outset for the professional services firm. Like you actually have to
Think through how to
you have to
organize all this
think
stuff.
through how you're going to organize it, how you're going to put it
Yeah.
together and everything else. You can't just turn to your usual old Excel spreadsheet that's got the rows and columns and the numbers and the hours, and it
Yeah.
spits out a number at the bottom, and then you throw that at the client, right? So it's more complex. It gets better with time, but it's more complex, at least on the outset, as you're learning this stuff, right? There's the other sort of comment that every project, every client is different. How can we even reinvent this every single time for some new client? It's never going to work. So we need to come up with a customized, bespoke solution for them. And it's not going to fit in this whole 3-option thing. There's just going to be one number, right? And in fact, that's what the client wants. The client just wants the one number. Or they're going to put their foot down and they say they don't want the 3. They want the one number, right?
And then they want to ask you to sharpen your pencil.
Yeah, no, right. So another thing that comes to mind is you as the consultant are thinking, we already know what number they want. We know they're going to just get the cheap one. Or we know that they always pick the middle, so we're just going to give them that one.
Or this is the only way that we know that we can deliver on this.
Yeah.
And maybe they haven't explored any R&D opportunities.
Those are very common objections, and there are more. I'm certain that others, hi listeners, you are welcome to email, whatever, message us on LinkedIn, whatever, and say, oh yeah, here, Mark, here's 10 more reasons why this is going to work for my firm. Go ahead,
Yeah, why aren't you using 3-option pricing?
let us have it.
Let us know.
Let us have it. But here's a reality check, is that your firm is already creating options internally that you don't ultimately end up showing to the client, right? When you're putting together, when you're doing your rows and columns in your spreadsheet, you're making choices and decisions in there already, right? You're making trade-offs on, oh, they're never going to pay for that thing, so I have to either remove it or discount it heavily or whatever else, or your hours and numbers, and you're shifting those things around, sometimes completely arbitrarily, just because your brain is on fire right now. And you're like, oh, the client's not going to do that, but they do that. They'll do this. They'll do that. So you're just chewing away at this whole process of pricing, and you're making a ton of decisions already. What you're not doing is actually just taking that decision-making process and turning it back to the client and saying, all right, I came up with 3 options. Now here they are. Let's talk them through. And now you pick, right?
Yeah.
Here's a trick with this, right? One price isn't simpler. It's far more risky, right?
Yeah.
Keep that in mind, because most folks don't understand that that's one of the implications here, is that you're actually putting your client in a riskier situation by giving them one price rather than 3. And I've said this before, is that if you just give them one price, John, you're forcing them, telling them that they have to go somewhere else to get something to compare it to. You're listening to Breaking BizDev,
The podcast that beats up, breaks down, and redefines business development for the professional services firms of tomorrow. Your hosts are John Tyreman, founder of Red Cedar Marketing, the podcast marketing company for experts and professional services firms,
and Mark Wainwright, principal consultant and founder of Wainwright Insight, the fractional sales manager and sales consultant to professional services firms.
If you find this podcast helpful, please help us by following the show and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts.
And now, back to the show.
Yep. Again, we want our counterparts to want to figure out how to work with us, not if they want to work with us.
If you gave your prospective client one price, you literally forced them to go somewhere else to get another comparative price. I've seen them just go white as a ghost and look at me and said, I've been doing this for 20 years. It's like, yeah, you have. You gave them one price. And some people you've got a relationship with and they're okay. But most of them, they're just like, oh man, now I need to go somewhere else and get another price. You're forcing them to. That's a killer. All right. So let's talk about what this really is, right? We want to make sure we've cleared the deck on any misconceptions here. So what is 3-option pricing?
Yeah, 3-option pricing is a way to design the buying environment for your counterparts. It's a structured way to frame the specific services you're offering, what the client gets, what they don't. You're showing them what they're missing out on if they don't go with different options, what they get with ones, what they don't with others. It's a challenge of displaying visual information, but it is a very powerful tool for clients. So I think that's really what it is.
Yeah. And I'd add to that, it's a powerful tool to be used in a conversation, right? We've talked about this in the past, but make sure that we weave this into today's episode, that these tables, these 3-option tables that we ultimately end up putting together are conversation tools for sure. So on the flip side, John, what is 3-option pricing not?
Yeah, we're not trying to manipulate people. We're not trying to trick people. We're trying to lean into different ways that people make decisions and try to make those little decisions easier and help guide our buyers to the best possible decision for them in their context, in their environment, for their firm.
There's no convincing, folks. There's no manipulation. There's no forcing people to buy something they wouldn't want to buy in the first place. So we're not trying to force people into making bad decisions. Actually, we want them to make good decisions, which is why we do this, right? This isn't a way for us to just make more money. Sometimes you will see, and I would say quite often, you will see an increase in your sort of estimated contract amount if you go through this process, because ultimately the client ends up opting into more stuff than you would have initially presented to them, because they see the value, they understand it, and then they opt in to it. Lo and behold, it might work for you quite well, but it's definitely going to work for your clients. So this is completely a win-win situation for sure.
Sure.
And a group that is hypersensitive about being salesy are people in professional services firms. Our friends, the architects, the engineers, the lawyers, the accountants, all those folks, they have
a reputation to maintain.
Yeah, exactly. So they're super, super sensitive to all this. But conversely, John, why do we think that 3-option pricing works specifically for professional services firms?
Yeah, I think it displays that you understand the market. It displays that you've been there before, right? It's because if you're presenting different options, you're saying, hey, based on my experience, based on my knowledge of the market, here's a couple different directions that we could go. That signals that you know your stuff, right?
Yeah.
It signals that you're taking a holistic perspective and you've got the best intentions of the buyer in mind. So if you want to be a trusted advisor, the 3 option pricing tables help support that.
I totally agree. And I love that you led with that. I think that's a perfect example of why this is so good for professional services firms, because whether you're being explicit or just implicit about your sort of breadth of knowledge and awareness and expertise, it lets that come through early on in the process when you're doing your scoping and pricing and everything. And it's not just, look, we're the experts. You've got only one way to do this, and there's only one price. It's
Right.
like you're coming into this saying, like, actually, we've gone a number of different ways with this, and you could take this in a number of different directions. So let's have a conversation to see where you want to go. So I think that's good. Another thing that you mentioned a little bit earlier was making it really clear what's included and not included. And I think professional services firms a lot of times fail with that.
Yeah, I think that's important because, again, like you said earlier, Mark, this is a tool for a conversation, right? And when selling a professional service, there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of things that could be included, could not be included. We could go in all the different directions, all the different elements. So visually displaying that can be challenging. And we'll talk about that on the next episode where we break down the different elements of these tables. But it could be as simple as a dash versus a checkbox to visually show the difference there.
The visual cues are really helpful. What we're really doing when we're walking through this process where we're showing things, what's included, what's not included, and hopefully people are picturing sort of those green check marks and red X's and things like that. We'll get into that, but we are as clearly and carefully as we can showing what's included and what's not included in certain choices and certain options so that there's nothing ambiguous in the situation, right? There's no sort of 6 months down the road, oh, I thought that you would be doing this. So I thought that you would be doing that. Oh, I thought this was included. And inevitably, we weren't explicit enough about it. We didn't clarify enough. We start saying yes to things that we wouldn't have otherwise said yes to, and then scope creeps and everything else. So we're really explicit about it. And the other part of that is that someone said, oh, but that wasn't included initially, but it's pretty clear that we want it right now. They're like, what's that going to cost? You're like, oh, there you go. There's your choices between that option and the other option you didn't choose. So it's the difference between those two. It's right there in front of you. Clear.
Yep.
All right. So that's a couple of the reasons why we think specifically it works well for expert firms, for professional services firms.
Mark, you've got a section here on caveats.
We'll probably dive a little bit more deeply into this, and hopefully people are starting to get to a point when I talk to firms and individuals about this, I can start to see the gears start to spin in their heads and they start to figure out how they're going to start to assemble these options, breaking free of the single option mindset and move into 3 options. And all of a sudden they start building these 3 options. And a lot of times I have to, okay, stop. Here's the big caveat with this is that these options need to be built in a way that, are meaningful and valuable to your clients, which means that they can't just be constructed out of thin air.
Right.
You start building these 3 options and you think, what are my options? You actually have to rewind or maybe just think back to some of your initial conversations. Did you do thorough enough discovery to understand what things are most important to them and what things are least important to them? Did you do that? If you haven't done that, that's really critical. Because when you put together these options, the options need to be meaningful. The client or the prospective customer or client, they need to understand them. They need to care about each option and, frankly, the elements that comprise each option. The components need to be meaningful. And the easy example of that is here's your sundae, and I can give you extra butterscotch and an extra cherry on the top. How about that for just $1 more? And someone says, I don't like butterscotch and keep the cherries, right? It's like no value. Like in its simplest form, like that's it, is like you offered options that someone didn't care about. And frankly, maybe rubbed them the wrong way. They're like, you didn't ask me in the first place if I like butterscotch. Why are we even having this conversation? So we're there, right?
That's a good point.
The other part of this is what I said is the caveat is just that the options need to be meaningful and they need to be valuable, meaning that the client understands them to the degree that they are able to assign value to each different option, maybe even a dollar sign, so that they can differentiate between the three. If the options are built in a way that the client is unable to differentiate value between the three different options and they can't assign a dollar figure one way or another, then we haven't offered up the right things, right? Or we haven't gotten to the point where the client is aware and educated enough in this whole process that they're able to determine higher value, lower value, et cetera. So those are the two little caveats right there. And that's why these three options are so critical to be built on a good foundation of understanding.
That's exactly
right? So
where
important.
That's exactly where I was going to go, is both
Yep.
of those caveats that you gave were like structural and foundational in your understanding.
Once we understand what elements throughout this whole process, hopefully we're having good conversations, good discovery. Hopefully we've qualified well initially that this is a good fit. This client's we're going to be able to be successful with these folks. Once we've determined good fit and we've put together our three options here, once we understand the client enough, we can put together these elements that are most and least meaningful and valuable to the client so that they can choose easily. We can facilitate a really good decision-making process. So that's another caveat. And that's another big one here, is that we cannot do this without really understanding what people understand and what people assign value to. We're going to tease this, right? So our next episode, we're going to dive deeper into some examples of this. But one really easy example, we'll drag in the architects who are near and dear, even engineers and other folks. Maybe this is for some sort of a study or some early design work to be done for a prospective client, where option A is called essential, option B is recommended, and option C is strategic, right? So essential is just some basic sort of building code review, some basic shapes of buildings and things, and some high-level costs. Recommended really starts to flesh all that out with multiple options, maybe a workshop with decision makers and stakeholders, and then some sort of analysis of the risks involved in the project. Option 3 is strategic, where we're testing the market, we're understanding the life cycle costs of these various options that we could design and build. And entitlements is, are they going to sell this thing down the road or whatever else? And that was a lot of architecty language in there, but there's a bunch of different ways you can put together these options. And we talked about the same project. It's the same client. There's just different levels of work, engagement, insight, expertise, risk, all that sort of stuff that we can split out into three options and let the client choose. So that's just one kind of random option.
Yeah, that's one example, and we're going to dive into a lot more on our next episode and all the different details of how to build those three option tables and use that as the tool as part of those synchronous conversations. Mark, as we close here, what are some of your parting thoughts?
Start with some basic, I'll call them draft proposals, right? So don't try to roll this into some really evolved kind of formal contract situation. Make these sort of drafty in nature. Make sure they're conversational, right? Maybe just start in one service area with one service offering. Keep it simple. Don't try to roll this out across your entire organization. Make sure to keep your pricing differences, your different options meaningful, right? They can't be meaningless. Three different choices the client has to make have to be meaningful, and they have to be able to see the value in each. An easy one, and this is kind of a tactical one that we'll get into next time, John, is that maybe label one option as recommended, right? Because I think at the end of the day, one of the things that's going to happen out of this whole process is the client's going to come back to you and they're going to look at the three options. They're going to understand them. They're going to take them in. They're going to have some ideas on which direction they want to go, but they're going to come back and they're going to say, I don't know, John, what do you think? Yeah. The other thing, and this is most important, is that, right, this has to be a conversation. Use a narrative, talk them through it, help your clients navigate this. Just don't throw up spreadsheets and numbers, right? This is not that conversation. This is a narrative. There needs to be some meaning, some value, some kind of understanding around this whole thing, and not just, it's not a spreadsheet. So that means, of course, folks, don't stick this on an email and send it off to your client with your fingers crossed. Don't do that.
Schedule that synchronous conversation.
Schedule that synchronous conversation. All right. There's a part 2 on this, so we will get there. But here's the hopeful reframe on this, right? 3s are already how people's brains are working. It's already how your clients are making decisions. The question isn't whether or not you should use this. It's like, why haven't you done this already?
Ponder that. And then on the next episode of Breaking BizDev, come back with a refreshed mind so we can dive into how you can start putting these 3-option pricing tables together for your proposals. Mark, this has been a fantastic episode. Until next time.
Until next time, John.
Thanks for listening to Breaking BizDev. Subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or listen to the show at breakingbizdev.com. This episode was produced by Red Cedar Marketing. If you think a business podcast is right for your company, visit redcedarmarketing.com to learn more.